Hi, and welcome everybody to another edition of the Winner's Circle Sports Betting Podcast. I'm Ross Benjamin of rbwins.com. It's Wednesday, April the 20th, and I got a special guest with me today, Mr. Scott Spreitzer from DocSports.com, one of the great handicappers at a great site. Doc Sports been around for 50 years, and folks, when a site lasts that long and has that kind of longevity, they're doing something right. And if you look at the handicappers over there, you'll know why. Anyways, Scotty, it's been a long time since we've done anything together. I'm so glad to have you aboard. And how are you?
I'm doing well, and I was very excited to get the call from you about doing this because you've carved one heck of a path for yourself over the course of the years. And, you know, it's funny with Doc Sports. I remember when I met with Wade, the owner of Doc Sports, who took over for, you know, the late Maury Mosman, of course, known as Doc himself, and started the whole ball of wax 50 years ago. And I told Wade, I said, you know, Wade, I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, and I can remember that darn logo of the medic with the football shoulder pads and the helmet carrying a football.
Iconic.
When I was like 10 years old, going into smoke shops with my dad to pick up gambling information. And now I'm working with the guys. It's pretty cool the way things have gone.
Yeah, it's very humbling when you stop to think about it, because I went through the same experience with Mark Lawrence years ago. You know, I always looked up to the guy before I got into the sports betting industry full time, and he really was a very, how could I put it? He was the most influential person early on in my career, and showed me how to do things the right way and the wrong way. And we've all had those kinds of people in our career early on. Scott, can you, I mean, off the top of your head, can you name one or two people that might have filled that role for yourself?
Absolutely. One's going to be very well known. One's going to be probably not known outside of Nevada. The one that got me started in this whole thing, I was, 20 years old when I started doing my first radio show here in Las Vegas at a little AM station. And I started doing a sports betting show in the morning. It was a funny mix because we were, during the day, basically for the most part, it was big band, it was Sinatra, Dean Martin, that kind of stuff. And then in the evening, it was Angels baseball, UCLA football, and that kind of stuff. So I started doing a morning show, a 1 hour show in 1988 called Sunrise Sports. The program director at the time was a guy by the name of Seat Williams, who has had a long history in Nevada broadcasting. He's in the Nevada Broadcasting Hall of Fame. And he was also working part-time for National Sports Services, which was headed by Jim Feist. And so he goes, man, you ought to come over, and, you know, we got a couple of guys that are leaving, come on over, audition for these guys, and on and on. So I go over there, Ross, and I'll tell you quickly, it was probably, I'm going to say May of '89. So you're talking about the fact I was 22 at the time. I go in there and I auditioned and had to be 1 or 2 as far as the all-time worst audition tapes you've ever heard in your life. And I just blew it off. I left. Thanks a lot. Nice to meet you guys, whatever. It was a guy by the name of Randy McGuire, who still in touch with, and he took the audition. And I left there thinking, I'm never going to hear from these guys. If I do, I probably should turn down the job because they know what they're doing. They hired me off of this. So I get a call like 6 weeks later, and they're like, are you ready to come work for National Sports Services? I'm like, are you kidding me? My first day at National Sports Services, I had to make a decision. It was August 8th or 9th of 89, excuse me, because that morning I get a call from the Sands to come and work over at their sports book for a guy named Bob Gregorka. So I've got a choice: go to Jim Feist Sports, go to the Sands. Well, I decided to make the right move, it turned out to be, of going to Jim Feist Sports. Started doing the Stardust Line radio show in '91, less than a year later, at the age of 24, and or 2 years later. And that turned into a 5-year co-hosting gig. I finally had to leave. It just got too busy to be down there doing that. That started everything for me, Ross. One thing led to another, and here we are. Scared to say, but 30 years later, you know, we're still in the business. But Jim Feist, Seat Williams, got to be the two most influential people. Mike Lee, the late Mike Lee, had a lot to do with my grooming as I landed the TV show with Jim and those guys in the mid-90s. Mike taught me all there was to learn about credibility, about talking to the public, letting them know that you lose when you lose, things of that nature. He was one of the best, one of the most humble guys in the business, the late Mike Lee.
Yeah, ahead of his time. And remember, folks, back then, those are pre-internet days, or in the infant stages thereof the internet. So a lot of shady guys were performing back then, and records couldn't be documented or couldn't be verified. And what Scott's saying with Mike Lee is he was ahead of his time in that regard. I was fortunate, the same thing with Mark. He taught me how to do things right, as I alluded to. And to this day, all you have is your honesty and integrity. And you got to own up when you lose. Look, we don't win every day. And when you lose, you tell the truth and you gain people's trust. Now, if you're losing more than you're winning, I don't care how much you tell the truth, you're not going to last in this industry. So you have to give us a little bit of credit, folks. Scott's been doing it about 10 years more than I have. And when you last that long, like I said with Doc Sports, it goes the same thing with the handicappers in general. That just speaks volumes to you. Scott, I vividly remember a story you told me back in the day, that when we were talking about how we first knew that we wanted to get into the sports betting business and what was our foundation. And you said, we used to sit around a table at my house with my dad and my brothers, and it was like a tradition. We get the old Parley cards and we start filling them out. And I laugh because I got to tell you a quick story here real quick, and then I'll let you elaborate on what I just said. But back in I was about 6 years old, and people used to laugh because I'd sit and watch football with my father at 5, 6 years old. I would be one of the only kids my age that would read the sports section on a daily basis. Although at that time I was just looking at the standings. Sure. But my dad used to fill out the Parley cards. And I said, Dad, could I do one? He goes, here, I'll put $1 on, pick 3 teams. Back then you could pick 3 teams minimum. And I picked 3 teams. He put $1 on it and I won. I got $5. I thought I was a millionaire. And I thought it was easy from there. But a lot of lessons came in between. So anyway, tell the folks a little bit about, I'm sure that was a starting point or a foundational point with that story I just elaborated on. And if I wasn't accurate with that, correct me if you want.
Well, I'll tell you, no, you were pretty accurate. I mean, you got a great memory, by the way, but because it's been a while since we talked about those things. But, it's funny because my dad, we were a blue collar family. My dad worked for Burlington Northern Railroad. He was an engineer for many, many years. And of course, when you work for a place like, Union Pacific, Burlington Northern, construction, all those kind of different jobs, Tuesdays were a big day. That's the day you bring home the line sheets. As you mentioned, there was no internet. So Tuesday afternoons or evenings, if my dad would get home, I couldn't wait to jump into it. I was probably 7 years old when I started looking at these lines. Didn't know what I was doing, obviously, but I just was into it. It was just cool to get that paper with all the games for the weekend. And I remember back in the day, Ross, it was like there were no pick'ems with these Omaha bookies. Every team was -1. If it was a pick'em in Vegas, it was -1, either team in that particular game. Now, I grew up in Nebraska, so for those under 30, they actually competed for national titles from the mid-'60s through the late 90s into 2000, 2001. Now, I know since then it's been a little rough, but we were drawn into football from the age of like 3. As soon as we could talk and walk, we were watching football games, and generally speaking, college more than pro because of the Huskers. And so I was brought into it at an early age. I can remember Johnny the Jet running back punts. I got it right behind me, in fact.
Johnny Rogers you're speaking about, correct?
Yeah, Johnny, behind me, that picture on the wall there is Johnny the Jet Rogers return.
He was electric. People, people are too young to remember that, but boy, oh boy, every time he touched the ball, he was a threat to go all the way. Anyway, go ahead, Scott.
Well, I was just going to say, and so what happened is I morphed into liking the lines. I went from being a big football fan to, man, I like these point spreads, whatever the heck those things are, when I was 6 or 7 years old. So then what happened is I really started following. That's all I cared about was point spreads when it came to games outside of Nebraska football. And what happened was I had a couple of uncles who lived about maybe 20-minute drive from us. They were in the heart of Omaha. We were in a suburb called Bellevue. And in Omaha, they didn't have cable yet. So we're talking late 70s, but they had it in Bellevue. Crazy enough, town of 30,000 has cable, town of 500,000, it doesn't. And so Monday nights, I think it was Monday nights, they used to have NHL on MSG on Monday nights. And so I'd get a phone would ring in the kitchen. Mom would go over there, grab the phone, talking to my uncle. I'm not paying, all of a sudden, Scott, Uncle Bob wants to talk to you about something. She's surprised as I am. It's about 2 hours before face-off. Scott, who do you like in the Rangers game? Who do you like in the, this stuff, And so I'm a young kid. That started around probably 11 years old.
Yeah.
They would call every Monday. And then it got to, you got to come watch the games with us. So my uncle and his brothers, they were uncles through marriage, they all would join together, rent a room in a hotel in Bellevue so they could watch the games that they bet on. And they invited me about half the time to come down and sit with these guys who were all 45 years old and I'm 10 or 11. And we're watching games and, high-fiving or whatever else. That's how I kind of got introduced to it. Yeah. My first bets were like, 11 to win 10 or $10 three-teamers in the bowls. My first real bet had to be 79 or 80. So I'm like 12 or 13. And it was a Creighton University, DePaul Blue Demons college basketball game. And I told my dad, you got to get down on this, man. And I followed Creighton big time. That was my basketball team. And I told my dad, we got to get down on this. This line's off by a couple of points. He's looking at me funny. And then, of course, we did. He probably threw a C note on it. I threw my big bet of $20 on it, 22 to win 20, and it cashed. So that's how I got into this, Ross, in a long-winded story. It was built in, but whether that's good or bad, it was built in from the time I was a little kid.
Yeah, that's good stuff, Scott. No, you weren't long-winded. It was very interesting to I know I was intrigued by it. Scott, as a young adult, I started doing a little part-time thing with one of the local bookies in town. The statute of limitations has passed, folks, so I can talk about this now. But I tell you what, it really it helped me in the sports handicapping aspect, because I often say, Scott, and I don't know how you feel about this statement, but what I always mention, if you want to become a successful sports bettor, the first thing you have to do is, back then I would say, think like a bookie. Now it's think like an odds maker, because there's too many times when you get a line thrown at you. Bettors have short memories, okay? And they remember what happened last week or last night, and they overreact to what they saw on many occasions. Now, granted, teams go on hot streaks, right? They'll cover 6, 7 in a row. But where I'm going with this, Scott, is those games that look too good to be true. And in sports betting, more times than not, it is too good to be true. So, and you got to be real careful if you see a line, especially we've seen some lines in the NCAA tournament. We see, I can't think of a specific example, but where teams from smaller conferences are either a pick'em or a short dog, and they're a lower seed. And of course, the novice bettor or the occasional bettor will look at a situation like that and think he's got an absolute lock. Now, you may win on occasion doing that, but it really taught me, my point being, is being on the other side of the table and then coming to this side of the table. Plus the fact I never liked the guy I worked for. So every time I go on a hot streak, I think of him, that I'm kicking his ass. So that's how we go from there. Anyway, Scotty, great stuff, man. Anything else? Let's talk about the NBA playoffs before we get to our free pick. The old zigzag theory isn't working. Last night, if you go by a team that covered in the first game of the series to the second game, all three of those teams that failed to cover again. So again, folks, there's no such thing as a no-brainer theory where you can walk yourself through it, because bookies know it. If we know it, the bookies know it too, or the odds makers, whatever you want to term it. So any thoughts in terms of it? The other thing I want to ask you is, the novice bettors out there, are people who haven't followed you before, some specific things you may look at in NBA playoff betting as compared to the regular season.
Yeah, it's interesting with playoff betting, because for many, many years, it was a situation where I like to look at teams that were flying up and down the court during the regular season. And I'm going to explain, if we talk about the Grizzlies and T-Wolves in a bit, about how it doesn't mean as much now as it did then. It used to be one of those situations, and it depends on the talent level of the team still to this day. If you got a team that just runs up and down the floor, man, they're just firing the ball, they're taking the least amount of time off the shot clock in the regular season, they're winning games left and right. A lot of those times, those teams have a real hard time adjusting the first round of the playoffs. And sometimes it's too late before they realize it ain't working and they're knocked out of the playoffs. And we saw that kind of with Memphis in game one, and they woke up. One of the fastest teams out there all season long when it came to getting that transition going. In fact, the fastest when it came to getting into transition. And all of a sudden they come out in game one and they're like, wow, playoff basketball kind of slows down a little bit. And you've got to be able to adjust to that quickly or you're gone, even if you're the favorite. Well, they adjusted extremely quickly. But that's one of the things when it comes to playoff basketball. I don't get caught up on a lot of the stats that take place with ultra fast, ultra quick, shoot early in the shot clock teams when they get to the playoffs, because a lot of times those were built against teams, that were resting players, things like that, or didn't exert game energy. This ain't the NHL. This ain't where the guys come out, the stars come out and play every single night, play their butts off every single night of the regular season. And I'm not faulting the NBA. It's just the way it happens to be in that particular sport. So you got to watch out for things like that, and again, just don't get caught up too much on what you saw in the regular season, especially from bust out teams that decided they were going to play on a fast track and all of a sudden get to the postseason and they're matched up against a good defensive basketball team. No, they get knocked in the jaw, they get popped in the nose a couple of times and they have to react to it. So, it's all baked into the number. The bettors, the bookies, I should say, stand behind the counter. They're making their lines and they're like, okay, the public absolutely in love with the fact that this team won 58 games in the regular season, fly up and down the floor. They're going to have to pay a little bit extra tax for that team in this opening game of the NBA playoffs. And you can generally go against those teams and do well in certain spots.
Yeah, absolutely. And we saw, like you said, what happened in game one, even though they allowed 130 points in that game and scored 117 themselves. But we saw what happened in game two. Minnesota, by the way, I'm going to talk about the game 3 of the series tomorrow as part of my free pick. But Minnesota, one thing that jumped out at me, another team that likes to play fast, high scoring team. Both of these teams, I will say this though, Scott, when it comes to that series, I think it will affect Memphis if they progress beyond the first round, more so than in this series in terms of what you just alluded to. Only because Minnesota is not a very good defensive team. Both teams play matador defense, in my opinion. And I stand corrected. Memphis did win last night in covers, so the zigzag theory was 1 and 2. I'm glad you brought that up. Anyway, baseball. Anything you want to add in baseball before we get to our free picks? Anything you saw in the early going? I know myself, I like to just stick my toe in the water before I jump in. In baseball season, I think I've only released 20 picks so far. Anything you want to touch upon, you could share with the audience in terms of early season Major League Baseball handicapping?
I'd say over the last decade, including so far this season, I probably, if you took down the last 10 years of baseball in April for me, it would probably come out to about 1.5 plays per day.
Yeah.
And that's about what I do the first few weeks of the season. Of course, this year we got pushed back a week, so we don't have as much information to glean from, as we would normally this point of April. So we got another week to go here before we start getting really solid info. I guess the things that surprised me a little bit, the A's, after starting 0-2 and watching their wins total drop from an original number of like 77, 76 and a half, all the way down to the high 60s. They start 0-2. They've got 2 really good pitchers in Cole Irvin and Frankie Montas. And they lost the first 2 games with those 2 guys on the hill. But since then, with those 2 on the mound, they're 4-0. Okay, that's not going to last. So they're on this 7-3 run after the 0-2 start. They're just 3-3 during the 7-3 run when it's not Irvin or Montes starting for the Oakland A's. They're going to be sold probably in a month or so, and selling comes around for Major League Baseball. And the cool thing about fast starts by bad teams that don't have a lot is we get to take advantage when those prices get over adjusted for the general bettor, and we get to go against a team like Oakland. That's just around the corner.
Yeah.
Keep an eye. I know you'll keep an eye on that, but people
Absolutely.
watching,
Absolutely.
keep an eye when they start losing those games, and especially when it's not Irvin or Montes on the hill. The Reds are what we thought they were.
Yeah.
To quote Dennis Green, 8 straight losses, all 8 losses by more than 1 run. And that's a team that's minus 31 2 weeks into the season in run differential. Can't hit lefties for their lungs. They couldn't do it last year on the road. They can't hit lefties on the road this year. They're not going to get any better. So Oakland's a surprise in the right way. Colorado's a surprise in the right way, although I want to see if that home road dichotomy from last year sticks to this season, because they're off to the great start as of Wednesday afternoon. As we cut this, they're off to a great start at home. We'll see what happens when they go on the road, where they've played just 2 games thus far. And the final team I think we're going to be able to play against, Ross, is San Diego. I know they're out to an 8-5 record, but they're 2-4 against the Braves and the Padres. They've beaten up and built that record against the D-backs and the horrible Reds. I think there's going to be a point coming pretty soon And I'm hoping they win on Wednesday, keep that winning going, and then they start getting a little bit deeper into a better level of competition, and we can look to fade the Padres a little bit.
Yeah, especially with Francisco Tatis out for what, the first 2 months, I believe, Scott?
It's like at least, yeah.
Yeah, you're taking a key cog. They can't hit. That's the bottom line. They can't hit. Kansas City can't hit. There's a few of them out there. What really shocking to me early on. Look, I always knew the Yankees with that lineup, they're going to strike out a lot, but it's like 90% of the runs, and I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you get what I'm trying to say. It seems 90% of the runs they have scored so far, and there hasn't been many, came via the home run. I mean, with men in scoring position, they're leaving guys on left and right. You got a couple guys sitting below the Mendoza line. So I would keep an eye on the Yankees only because when they start to, not so much this series or the one they're playing when they play Detroit, but against better teams like Toronto and the Bostons and the Tampa Bays and within their division, where you'll be able to get cheaper prices than you normally would in past years. And you want to keep an eye on that because sooner or later, Scott, I mean, I'm not saying they're going to win the division or the World Series, but there's no way you're going to hold that lineup in check and putting up those futile offensive numbers they've been putting up so far early in the season. So that's my take in terms of that goes.
I agree completely. I think, you're hitting the nail on the head. I like to look and see how teams are doing. My favorite metrics are WOBA and weighted runs created plus when it comes to how teams do at the plate. And you can see that groove being built by some of these teams. That's why I say like Cincinnati's, they're going to have a winning streak of 3 games here and there, but they're not going to be any better overall. They second year in a row, they can't hit in certain situations.
Yeah.
They're no better this year than they were last year. So, and you can see when those trends at the plate start to develop. And if you pay attention to it, as much as guys like Ross and I do, because this is what we do, you can catch those before the books have to adjust their prices, make a few bucks.
So what was those 2 terms you used you apply to your handicapping in baseball?
WOBA and weighted runs created plus, and they have a lot to do with you're kind of adding more to the equation than just hits in amount of at bats. You're taking a little bit from each, and it's like when guys look at like XFIP and FIP for pitchers. The earned run average doesn't mean quite as much when you dig into that stuff because you're looking at how pitchers do with luck or with bad luck. And that kind of all factors into it. That's kind of the same what you're doing with weighted runs created plus and WOBA to a certain extent without getting too deep into it. That might be a good tutorial video one of these days, Ross.
Yeah, absolutely. It will probably teach me something as well because I'm not familiar with those terms. I'm certainly not the sharpest tool in the shed. That's why I bring guys like you around, Scott. I learned. If I don't go ahead.
I was just going to say you do quite well. So I don't. You're a very humble guy, and I really like that. I appreciate that, but you do quite well for yourself. And these are just things that I've had in the last couple of years.
I mean, you got to evolve in this business. You have to, and the more tools you provide us with, the more dangerous we're going to become to the odds makers and the sports books. But I will say this, I don't care how long you've been doing this. I've been doing it for 20 years. I get a guy like Scott on, I get a guy like Doug Upstone on, a guy like Mark Lawrence. I always pick up little things, okay, that I add to my arsenal. And I'd like to think along the way, I add something like that as well, but I don't keep score. Okay. My point being, folks, the more you could absorb, the more you could add to your handicapping base, the better you're going to be as time goes on. So great point. I always say I'll make it simple for me. I'm going to use ERA and WHIP. Okay. I've said on numerous occasions over the last 2 weeks, I put a lot more emphasis on WHIP than I do on ERA. And for those of you out there not familiar with the term, it's walks plus hits divided by innings pitched. And to me, ERA is the most misleading stat when it comes to starting pitching that there is. And, the other part of the equation too, Scott, and I'm sure you touched upon it earlier, is we had a short spring training. And starting pitchers didn't get stretched out during spring training. So as a result, we have bullpens now being asked to do a lot more in the early going because the starting pitchers are getting pulled in at an earlier stage than they would be in past years in early April. So keep an eye on the bullpen's whip. Also keep an eye on the fact how much a bullpen is being used, because sooner or later, I don't care how good the bullpen statistics are, if they're putting in numerous innings time after time, and then you suffer an injury or two along the way, that season statistic means nothing. You want to keep an eye on how they've done. Like, I like to look at the last 7 days or so, Scott.
I was just going to mention 7 games, Ross.
Yeah.
I like to look back about 7 games, which is generally about 10 days.
Yeah. So in any event, we're going to get to our free pick. For those of you just joining us, we're talking to Scott Spreitzer from DocSports.com. And for those of you old enough, remember Scott from the old Proline TV show, which he did for about 10 years with Jim Feist and Glenn McGrew. And who am I missing here? Dave Koken, who's still around and doing well. And anybody else I'm missing there? I don't want to disrespect anybody that was on that show.
Those are the main guys. And I got to tell you, I still talk to Jim probably like once a month. Yeah. Jim's in phenomenal shape. He's about 78 going on about 28, better shape than I'm in. Dave Koken, I'm not kidding. This is literal. This is not exaggeration. Koken and I text each other 15 times a day, at least. About everything.
That's great.
Baseball, basketball, whatever's going on. We literally text each other 15 to 20 times per day. And it's been that way for as long as we've been able to text on these things. That's the way it's been. Now, he's very active on Twitter. I'm not all that active on Twitter. But anyway, Dave and I talk all the time. Glenn McGrew, great guy. You'd love him, Ross. I don't know if you got.
I never met Glenn. I never had the pleasure.
Terrific gentleman. He retired a few years ago. Still keep in contact with him. He's doing well. But like Bob Gregorka, he got back in the making lines of the Vegas Strip a ways back. And that pretty much says it all. We lost Jack Snow, unfortunately, the host and Rams wide receiver over a decade ago to an infection following hip surgery. But I still talk to our other host, who was Al Bernstein, who everybody knows from boxing.
Yeah.
Have dinner with Al once in a while. Terrific guy, Al Bernstein. And so I do still talk to him. But I appreciate you bringing it up because, man, I could talk for hours, as you can tell, when it comes to hanging out with those guys. And I learned so much.
Sure.
I love to do this to these guys. They were all 15, 20 years older than me. I love being able to say that. And so I got to learn from those guys, that group I did those TV shows with. Yeah,
Jack Snow, God rest his soul. I remember him when he played wide receiver for Notre Dame. That shows you. I was only 7 or 8 years old back then. That 1964 Notre Dame team with John Hewart at quarterback, who won the Heisman Trophy and never developed anything beyond that in terms of a pro. But good memories. Sort of like the Nebraska quarterbacks. They were always ran those options really good. And when was the last time Nebraska had a really good quarterback, Scott? I don't mean to rub it in, but it's Adrian Martinez. I mean, the kid looked like he was going to do something his freshman season, and then he just steadily regressed from that point on, and now he transferred out. Maybe he needs a change of scenery. I don't know, but I feel, because I know the Nebraska people, great people, the Midwestern people are the most polite people in the world, in my opinion. This gentleman here is one of them. He grew up in Nebraska. So, I squeeze for programs like that, especially if they've been not relevant for a long period of time and used to contending for national championships. And a lot of you young guys out there don't remember, like Scott just touched upon, Nebraska was perennially contending for a national championship. And back then, you know what? You just had to hope the pollsters liked you at the end of the year. There was no BCS championship game. There was no 14 playoff. Anyway, we're getting off track here.
I'll tell you real quickly, though. I mean, it's funny you brought that up. When's the last time they had a winning quarterback? And I was doing a show a couple of weeks ago with a show back in Omaha. And we were talking. I go, it's been 20 years. Eric Crouch was the last time they had a guy who could at least contend for a championship at quarterback. I mean, that's how long it has literally been. So you're talking about 30-year-olds not even knowing Nebraska was a player since they were 10 years old, 10 years old. It blows my mind. It bothers me. They sell out every home game still. The people are nuts. about Nebraska football.
Yeah.
To this day.
And that's the thing. I mean, if you're an 18-year-old kid coming out of high school and you're a 5-star recruit, I don't know why you wouldn't want to play at Nebraska. And I don't know why they can't get a guy like, same thing with Notre Dame. You know what I mean? The last couple of years, I don't want to pick on the quarterback they had last year and name them. But, you know, I look at a guy like that and say, how can't you do better than this?
Sure.
This guy was playing behind Graham Mertz a season ago. And we all know what Graham Mertz did the last year at Wisconsin. We're getting off track here, Scott. Me and him could talk all day. Anyway, let's get to the meat and potatoes. What do you got for a free pick for us on Thursday the 21st, Scott?
I am looking at the battle between the Warriors and the Nuggets. The game, the series going to Denver now with the Warriors up 2-0. If you look at the full game line, Ross, right before we jumped on here, Golden State laid 1.5 for the most part. Total was 224. Too much on the back of Jokic, the Joker, for Denver to win this series, obviously. And I'm not sure they're going to be able to win this particular game, but I'm still going to be on that. I'm going to tell you how in just a minute. If they had Jamal Murray, if they had Michael Porter, this is a different basketball team that could give Golden State all they could want, all they could handle, but they just don't have that weaponry on the floor to surround, Jokic. So you basically got a guy who can score 30 and grab 15 any given night, but you need like one or two players who might be able to step up and get 15 to 20. And they basically have one a night out of the remaining players who can get you 15, 18, 20 points a game tops. Then it really drops off. So they're really hamstrung. There's no doubt about it. But what I like in this particular game is the Nuggets laying a point in the first quarter. I think you're going to see a highly motivated effort. They have to. And, they're down 2-0, obviously. And so they're minus a point. Here's the cool thing. Now, I'm going minus a point, and it's right now plus $1.03 on that -1 from what I saw before we jumped on here. But you can go to certain books and check it out, folks, if you want to shop for things like this. It's useful in the playoffs more than anything else in the NBA. But you can move that to Denver plus 1.5 if you want to lay $1.65. You could go as high as Denver -3 in the book that I'm looking at opening quarter at plus $1.55. Get yourself a big payoff if they can get there. But for me, I'm fine with the universal -1 here on Denver. It's kind of funny over the years, Ross, and you know this, because for about a decade, if you took that home team in game 3 down 2-0 and just played the first quarter and the first half, I mean, you were literally hitting 65, 68% of those plays. Then the bookmakers saw too much action coming that way, got their butts kicked a little bit. 3 or 4 years ago, they started cheating, and I'm kidding when I say cheating.
No, I get you.
They taxed the first quarter. They taxed the first. I mean, there was tea thrown in Griffin's Wharf Harbor in Boston over less taxation than we get from the bookmakers on first quarter and first halves these days. But when it's a close line to pick, like this one, Warriors 1.5, you're not having to pay a bunch of tax on that Denver team. You're basically just looking for them to win outright that first quarter. So that's what I did, Ross. Free play on Denver, minus a point in the first quarter on Thursday. I am probably going to leave the full game alone.
There you go. Denver -1 in the first quarter, folks, over Golden State. Good point by Scott. What he's referring to, and when the bookies were getting killed on these first quarter bets, his team's down 2-0. Usually, I say usually, and most times, come out with a high degree of urgency and desperation. And once the other team weathers the storm, that's another story. But especially if they're at home, which Denver will be. So even more so. So Denver -1 over Golden State from Scott Spreitzer from DocSports.com. Folks, don't forget, go to DocSports.com. Scott Spreitzer, Doug Upstone, who you're all familiar with. I'm with me a couple times a week. Great handicappers over there at DocSports.com. Great site. And it'll be well worth your while to invest in any of those guys, especially Scott. He's one of my favorites, man. Nothing against Doug. I love Doug. Don't get me wrong. But anyway.
I just want to say something real quick, because I want them to know this is on me. If the audio is a little funky today on my end of things, it's me. It's not Ross. We got to get that taken care of. Just a little glitch in the system. And I also did want to say that I've gotten to know Doug Upstone over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
I knew of him. I didn't know him until about 2 or 3 years ago. He's like you. He's one of the class acts in this business. One of the most gentlemanly guys.
Absolutely.
I probably talk to him 2 or 3 times a week. Just a superb, decent human being who does his best to win more than he loses for the public, like we all try to do. So I just wanted to give a pat on the back for Doug and also
absolutely. I'm a big fan of Doug's. I really am. I know I said that it's not that I don't like Doug or I like Scott more. I just haven't worked with Scott for a while, so it's refreshing. Yeah, no matter what you do in your line of work, you need to reinvigorate sometimes. So this is one of those situations. But Doug, let me tell you, Scott, you hit it right on the nail right on the head. Class act, brings content to the table galore, and he really is passionate about what he does. And to survive in this industry and succeed in this industry, you better be passionate. He certainly is. Again, check out Scott and Doug over at DocSports.com. My free pick comes in a Memphis and Minnesota game. I'm looking at the total here, which is 237.5. Now, I know this is a high total, especially at playoff time. But as I alluded to with Scott earlier, these teams just don't play any defense. Now, the game did go under in game 2. I left that alone. I actually had Memphis last night laying to 6.5. Game 1, I went over the total. Looking at game 2 and why the game stood under by a considerable margin. First of all, Minnesota turned the ball over 19 times, and they only had 76 free throw attempts or field goal attempts, in that game, which is extremely low by NBA standards, and especially low for a team like Minnesota that scores a lot of points. So I don't see that happening again. Also, the fact the first 2 games have produced an enormous amount of free throws, and I don't see that changing. Matter of fact, the first 2 games, there was 40 free throws in game 1. 70 free throws in game 1 and 60 in game 2, as I recollect. A high number of free throws in an NBA game is usually around 50. And if you get any more than that, it puts you in a driver's seat to go over the total. And when they're averaging 65 free throws per game, that tells me the series is been played physical, and teams are getting up and down and getting to the free throw line. Or I should say, being aggressive. Minnesota has allowed 121 points or more, 8 of their last 10, Scott. It goes hand in hand what I said. They're just not playing any defense. They haven't all year. They depend on outscoring teams all the time. And they got a good dance partner here in Memphis, who's probably, I would say is the better team, just looking at the records in general. But by the same token, Memphis likes to get up and down, like Scott said. And it's almost like a puncher. They'll take a few to throw a few back. And that's exactly how they play. Memphis averages 94 field goal attempts per game. And again, when you get in the 90 range and above, that's an extremely fast pace, even by NBA standards. Minnesota, 91 field goal attempts per game. And like I touched upon, they only had 76 the last game. So I don't see that occurring again based on what they've done all season long. And again, the first 2 games of the series, like I said, 65 free throw attempts per game, and Minnesota, 49 out of 55 from the free throw line in the first 2 games, Scott, 89%. I know it's a big number. I'm not going to let it scare me away. I'm going to go Minnesota, Memphis over 237.5. I see this game being played in the 120s. Maybe one team gets in the low 130s. So that's what I'm going to do. Minnesota, Memphis over 237.5. Scott Spreitzer, he likes the Denver Nuggets minus the 1 over Golden State in the first half. Scott, tell the folks how well you've been doing of late. Any good streaks you got going on? What you got coming up this next couple days and the weekend?
Yeah, Ross. I mean, the NBA has been crazy this year, crazy good.
Yeah.
I'm glad to say it's my best year I've had in the NBA since like 97, 98. Since that season, which goes way back, obviously.
Yeah.
But the change that I made, and I basically been doing 1 play a day throughout the course of the regular season. Going back to late October, we're now 87 and 54, wow. Which is about 61.5%, right around there. It's been a terrific season. And what happened was before the season began, Ross, I thought, I don't want to get caught with 4 or 5 NBA plays and then find out, an hour before tip off that 3 players tested positive for COVID-19. Something we never really had to deal with before until season and a half ago. And so what I did is I'm going to eliminate that chance of going 0-4, eliminate the chance of losing 3 bets before the games even start because of that. So I thought, all right, I'm going to focus on 1 game. And because we're going to see likely, I thought before the season, more rest, more player management or game management for players this year with everything that was going on, I thought, you know what, I'm just not going to get caught with my pants down, so to speak. So that's what I've been doing. 1, sometimes 2 plays per day throughout the course of the regular season, playing situations more than matchups. Yeah. Now in the playoffs, it becomes matchup driven just as much as it does situations. So we were able to go 87 and 54 since October 21st, going into Wednesday night's action. And we'll hope to keep that going at Doc Sports. As Ross mentioned earlier, we're both kind of approaching baseball season a little bit slower. I do have a game a day for the most part, but we're not bumping out with, huge plays or telling people to increase bets in a big way in the early portion of the baseball season. But it's over at DocSports.com. Ross, I've been a part of Doc Sports now for 4 years, and I couldn't be happier. Good
for you, Scott. You deserve it. You and Doug deserve it. And that's a great site. Wade does a nice job over there. 87 and 54, folks, 61% since October 21st. And that's, if my math is correct, is 141 picks. I know a lot of you smartasses out there to comment say I could hit 60%. Well, maybe you could for a week or two. But here's the thing. If you could do it over that course of time with that volume of plays, it's not a fluke. Okay. On top of that, I always love these guys who chime in and say, I'm 61 and 20. Okay. Where are you documented? How do we check that? Usually they don't have an answer. And I always like to say it's because I said so.com is where you could find their results. So folks, 61% is not only good, it's phenomenal. If you hit 55% with that volume of plays, do the math, folks. Even at $100 a game, you're making a ton of money. So make sure you check this guy out. It's crunch time right now. Scott Spreitzer, NBA has been phenomenal. And the NBA playoffs get tough. It gets a little tougher, but we're up to the task. My NBA, I don't have that kind of streak going on, but not bad. Since April 1st, 15 and 7. With my NBA picks. And folks, NBA money line picks, I got to mention this because if somebody said this record, I would scoff at it, Scott. I've made 13 NBA money line picks this year. And when I do that, it's always a money line favorite of 135 or less or an underdog. I pick my spots. How'd I do with those 13 picks? 13 and 0. Wow. I gave 8 of them out last year, 7 and 1, 20 and 1 over the last 2 years, 13 and 0 this season. That's all documented at all the sites I'm on because I give out the same picks on every site. I don't vary from site to site. So I'm pretty sure I'm going to have a money line pick tomorrow, which would be Thursday in the NBA. You want to keep an eye on those folks. They do awfully well. Major League Baseball, my 10-star top plays, which is equivalent of at Doc Sports, a 6-7 unit play, I think. Is that right, Scott?
That's right.
Yeah. And what other people term as their best bets, 45 and 23 with those plays since the start of last season. And I hit a nice one last night with the Boston Red Sox. It was a little bit hairier than I thought it would be, but they won 2-1. A winner is a winner is a winner. They don't pay extra if you blow a team out, right, Scott? I don't know the last time you went to the window and said, I won by 20. Oh, great job, Scott. You bet 100. Let's throw in another 100. That was impressive. It doesn't happen that way. Anyway, so you can find me at rbwins.com. Folks, my single game and multi-game package, daily packages, I should say. If you don't make a profit, what I'll do is match whatever the purchase price was and stick it back in your account for future purchases. Okay, it doesn't get any better than that. My subscription plans, those of you who've been with me for a while know, if you're not making a profit at the end of your subscription plan, week, month, annual package, I always extend it until you do. I'll never ask you for more money unless I'm making money. So, Scott, any final words? It's great, really good to work with you again, buddy.
Yeah, it's been a blast. I mean, I just looked at my phone here. I got some text coming in, and I see we've been doing this for about 45 minutes, and it feels like it's been 5 minutes.
I know, so and we could go on for another 45. But
can you imagine me and Upstone? Yeah. Oh my, we'll be here for a day and a half.
Yeah, well, you know what? What's good about working with you two is I don't have to fight to get the floor. You guys are so accommodating. And I like to think I'm the same with you. And I love listening to you guys sharing your information too. So that's what it's all about. You young guys out there that want to get in this business. I know we're all competitive. I know Scott's real competitive like me. I mean, when I played sports, folks, I wanted to tear your heart out, but I'll also give you a hug at the end of the game, if that makes any sense. You young guys got to learn how to network like we do. Look, if Scott's not doing well on a site like Doc Sports, it does me no good. You know, it's a feather in my cap to have guys like him and Doug, Chip Chirimbus, Mark Lawrence. All the guys have been doing it for a while and succeeding, because anytime you're in any industry, if nobody's succeeding, everybody's going to go broke. You know. Anyway, until the next time, for Scott, go ahead. I'm sorry, Scott.
I wanted to give Chip Chirimbus a little hat tip also, because we go back 30 years.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I know he's on your show sometimes. I've watched your videos, and I just wanted to say that because I think I failed to mention his name about Proline. Chipper's still doing it, and there ain't a more fun guy in the business to hang out with. Tell me it right now. You want to hang out with somebody in this business? You find Chip, find where he's at, because that's where the party's at.
Outside of what we talk about in terms of sports betting, which he's very good at the way he does things. He's an excellent line reader. Outside of that, he's got more baloney than Carter's got pills. Anyway, until the next time, for Scott Spreitzer, I'm Ross Benjamin. Thank you for joining us today, folks. Good luck and God bless.